I'm just playing this loop right now of us in 2012 at the place we originated this in 2011. So this style of working isn't necessarily unique to us. I think it's been other forms of teamwork have been done around the world in the years leading up to when we started doing it, but I didn't know of anybody who was working this way as their primary way of working. I'm going to go ahead and start from the very beginning and just quickly narrate it. The whole video, finally. So this is an 8-hour day of us working, typical work day in 2012. We'd only been working this way for about 10 months when we took this video. We'd been invited to go speak at a workshop, at a conference, and we thought, well, why don't we bring a video? So we spend the first hour every day studying together, and an additional 3 hours on Fridays for a total of 8 hours studying together each week. You see that we don't do any kind of a stand-up. We just can start working without having to talk about it. We use a technique that's called driver navigators, and you can see it demonstrated here. The person at the keyboard is called the driver, and everyone else is a navigator. We just have to have some protocol of how we'll interact. There's a product owner sitting with us. We often have our product owners and other skills with us. There's a manager doing nothing useful. And here the team's taking a break, but there was no rule that you need to wait for the team to take a break. You take a break anytime you want to. We were using a timed rotation at the time for the driver. That means whoever's at the keyboard switches every 15 minutes. You can go work alone anytime you want. There's no rules in this. There's no strict rules of any kind. You always had the ability to go work alone, take a walk, take a nap, whatever you need to do to keep your focus. You can see everybody stays pretty engaged throughout the day. Most of the people here are software developers, but there's also 2 testers that were working that day with the team. Notice we take our lunch at the same time. There was no rule to do that. Up until this time, the rule was you come in whenever you want, you leave whenever you want, and you're not, you take lunch whenever you want. But once we start working together, we worked hard to align our schedules so we had more time together. So lunch is ending and we're back to work. There's a driver at the keyboard, and that'll switch out in just a moment. You'll see someone else at the keyboard, and that just keeps it a little bit lively. There's no rule that you need to do that, but that's the way we worked. So this short video shows a whole day of work when we were all working together. So I'm going to switch from this one to another video that we took a few years later. And this video was done in 2016. Same company, but now we've added more teams. And at this time, there are 6 teams working here. Each team has their own work area. And you can see they all have a bunch of big screens. Those are 80-inch monitors. There's a group in the back doing a retrospective. We'll talk a little bit about retrospectives in a minute. We basically follow the same things we devised in 2011, 2012. It's just a way of working well as a team. No stand-ups, no meetings, almost no meetings at all, because we're always working as a group. This will show you there's 6 people here, or 6 teams here. Each team would have between 5 and 8 people. The number of people doesn't matter. What's important is that we have the skills and knowledge that we need. You see we have our own area for CI/CD. It used to be before we had to hand that off to another team, but now it's done on this team. The product owners, we set up an office for them in our work area so we had easier access to them. That was one of the blocking things, the CI/CD or just to say deployments and interactions with the product owners and with testers and with database folks. Those were problematic because they took time, and we try to remove the waiting time in those. And we'll talk a little bit about that later. Lots of documents all over the place, so it's really easy for us to see what we're up to and what we're deciding on. Keep your hands clean. We're taking lunch again. Our habit is to do that at the same time, not necessarily having lunch together. But as soon as lunch is over, everybody's back at their work areas. I think we've seen enough of this. So this gives you an idea of how it looks in a full day of work. We shortened our rotation time to 7 minutes on average. That's not really an important thing. Let's go to my slides. You know, I'm going to use my other hand for this. So in 2011, we started doing this. By 2012, somebody found out about what we were doing. They had come in to do some training for us. We were learning some things, some technical things. And I had this trainer come in that I knew quite well. He was actually a very important part of me figuring out how to work as a team. But he came in and to give us this training. And then he noticed how we were set up for our work, all sitting at the same spot. And he asked, do you work this way? This is how you work every day? And we showed him what we did. And within a few days, we started getting emails from other places. He would travel around doing trainings on test-driven development and other code quality stuff. And he started telling people how we were working. So people would send us emails, we'd like to learn about what you're doing. And at that time, we really didn't have any way to explain it. So this talk grew out of people asking if we could just explain what we're doing. We didn't set out to do something that people would want to do. We just set out to make things better for us. And I'll talk about that a little bit today. But I want to make sure you understand this. I'm not here to tell you how you should work. I'm just here sharing how we worked. And if it's useful to you, fantastic. But other than that, it's just an interesting thing maybe. I like this picture. It's actually quite cute. But a friend of mine, someone who speaks a lot at conferences, told me, Woody, you should put pictures of cats into your slides. It'll make you seem more friendly. So I found this picture of a cat. And I like this picture because what it tells you is if you really like cats, you will see cats everywhere. And so from my point of view, teamwork is a good thing. So I'm warning you that I'm looking at the world through my lens. I'm looking at the world through my perspective. And it doesn't make it truth. It's just a human condition that we look for things that confirm what we already believe. So that's just another warning. The place where we started working this way was called Hunter Industries. It's a company that makes irrigation products. It was not a programming company. It's not a company that creates software, but we wrote a lot of our own software that's used in that company and by our customers and dealing with the business itself. We'll skip this part. We had to come up with some way to explain this. So we first came up with this saying, which I like quite a bit. All the brilliant minds working together on the same thing at the same time, in the same space, and at the same computer. This is really important to me. We cannot collaborate if we're not working on the same thing. We wouldn't collaborate if we're not working on the same thing. It makes it important or easier to collaborate if we're doing it at the same time. It makes it easier to collaborate instead of you doing your work and then a few weeks later you hand that thing over to me and I work on it. If we do it at the same time, it's easier to collaborate. And that goes also with the same space. It's easier to collaborate if we're sitting with each other. And for us, just by having one large screen in the early days and then two, we could actually do the work together, sitting together, talking together in real time. And that became what we used to call mob programming, which I now call software teaming. They both mean the same thing. So if we can gather together all the skills and knowledge we need, we can work directly on anything from start to finish without the queuing or waiting that normally happens when we split the work up. Now that means that we're not necessarily going to get our work done faster. It'll just get done sooner. We're not working any harder. We're working more directly on what we're doing. This, I think, is an important benefit of working this way, is things get done quite a bit sooner, which allows us to steer a lot better. And steering is really important to us getting the right things done. Now, I'm going to point out what I consider an ideal situation. I'm going to use my pointer. Let's see if it'll work here. Yeah, not bad. So there's a tester, a product owner, a coder, a database expert, a coder, and a coder. So clearly, it's a lot of different skills working together. This team, to me, is almost an ideal team because we did not need to go off of this team to ask people any questions. We could answer our own questions. And this allows us to work directly from start to finish. We're not waiting for returning emails or having meetings or whatever might usually get in our way of getting our work done. And very early on, we realized this is a huge benefit. So whenever we could, we'd work with what I call a whole team. A whole team means we can answer all of our own questions. If this was work that could be done with just one programmer and maybe, let's say, a product owner, that would be enough. But normally, there's more we need to cover than just one or two people. There is no work that we do in the modern workplace that has anything to do with software development, and most of what we do that doesn't require collaboration. And what we were trying to do when we started working this way is simply find out ways to collaborate better. We didn't start out thinking, let's all work as a group at one computer. We started out thinking, how can we improve our collaboration? We'll cover that just a little bit today. There's a view of it from the back, just so you can see in those days we used 2 projectors. So we're projecting up on a wall where we painted out the wall with reflective, whatever they call it, paint for projecting. You can see there's 5 people working that day, although there's only 4 people in the picture. The 5th person's taking the picture, and that was our tester. Here's a group doing this remotely. I happened to be in Brazil at the time we took this picture. I was working with a team in California. So, to be clear, it's not 5 people watching one person coding. That would be sort of silly, actually. It could be fun to watch somebody programming, but that's not the point. It's 5 people navigating and 1 person driving. Driving is like driving a taxi cab. If you get in the taxi cab, you're going to navigate the taxi cab driver. You're going to tell them where you want to go. And that's essentially what we would do. If we have 1 person at the keyboard, we called that the driver, and we didn't invent that terminology. That came from pair programming. And then everybody else is a navigator. But you can see if we're all shouting about where we want to go, that wouldn't be very effective. So we have to have some protocols in place, that we only speak when it's meaningful to speak, that we speak when it's appropriate, that we keep our mouths shut unless we have something to add. If everybody's speaking at the same time, we won't get anywhere. So this is the basic process we would follow. We have only one thing that I would say is close to a rule. I learned this from Llewellyn Falco. I learned this maybe in somewhere around 2007, even though I was following a process sort of like this. But I really like the way he put it. For if you have an idea, for it to get into the computer, it has to go through someone else's hands. It's a really simple little guideline. That requires, well, I'll ask you, if we're going to do that well, what would it require? For an idea to go from my head to the computer, it has to go through someone else's hands. What do we need to get good at? Somebody answer. Yell it out. Good explanation. What does the driver have to do? Good understanding, good listening. So all these things put together, we need to be good at communicating. And communication is more than me just explaining and somebody else hearing. There might be some discussions. There might be trying some things. And we really need to get good at being willing to try someone else's idea. So the techniques for this is what we developed over about a 6-month period in early 2011, so that the day we ended up actually working this way, and I'll tell that story shortly, we had already built a lot of the skills we need to have to be able to work well together. We need to be able to work well together if we're going to be effective in our collaboration. But this seems crazy. And so I'm going to show you some pictures real quickly of people all around the world working this way. Here's a group in Hunter. This is where we originated the idea. A group in Alaska, the UK. This is GDS in London, Government Digital Services. You can notice, as I show you these pictures, there's people here sitting together. They're all well engaged in the work they're doing. People often ask me, how do you keep people focused and engaged when you work this way? And I've never had a problem doing that. The work is going quickly. We're paying a lot of attention. So we need to be careful not to make it stressful, but we're sharing the cognitive load with 5 or 6 other people. It's not very stressful. So I'm going to go on. Notice 3 things. How much everybody's paying attention, how each place is set up differently, and I encourage everyone to find a way to do it comfortably. This can also easily be done remotely. Here's a group in Boston, a group in Stockholm, a group in London, a group at Harvard in Boston. There's 2 pictures here of this group in California, a group in South Africa. Everybody's set up a little differently. They're all set up a little also quite similarly. I don't think they're actually mob programming here, but it looks like mob programming to me. I bet you out of a group of programmers this size, there must be somebody who knows who that woman is. Does anybody know who that woman is? If you don't, look her up. I'll tell you her name, but she helped invent the computer they're working on there. Her group was one of the originators of the COBOL programming language. Her group wrote one of the first compilers. Her group invented the term bug for a computer bug. So that's Admiral Grace Hopper. You should read about her. But it looks to me like they're mob programming. The only advice I would have given them, of course, I was only a little boy when this picture was taken, I would have said, get yourself some big monitors, because reading papers just isn't a good way to have a user interface. Here's a group in Stockholm. No, this is Göteborg in Sweden, Germany. Somebody here must recognize at least a couple of those people, because that's right here in Paris. That's Christophe Thibault, right there. And brilliant. This is a group that meets here in Paris, I think, weekly to do coding dojos, and they use a mob programming style. This is where the coding dojo style that we adopted originated, here in Paris. Another group in France. I like to show this picture to show a not very comfortable working arrangement. And another not so comfortable. I don't have a problem sitting on the floor, but you can see this poor gentleman here. I don't know if you can, everybody can see it. He's got his head turned quite a ways around just to be able to see the screen. You couldn't sit that way all day long. Another not so good work area, but I would say this. I encourage anybody to try this no matter what your setup is, and then you'll find out, how do we need to set up to do this? One last pictures I'll show you here. This is a group in Sweden where they had, when I've last visited them, they probably had 10 or 20 teams working mob programming, and this particular group took some pictures and shared them in an article, and when I saw that article, I wanted to share their pictures. So you can see quite a bit going on here, but lots of whiteboards. I like to see that. There's actually at least 4 whiteboards I could see. Here's a UX designer. She's the one who wrote the article, and then there's like at least 3 large monitors scattered about. They have a very good work environment. Alrighty, it can be done remotely as well. These pictures are all from before the pandemic. These pictures are from 2016, 2017, but you can see people have been doing it remotely for a long time. This particular group is the group that supported, and some of them invented, the Cucumber IO, Cucumber BDD framework that you might use. And they've been working as pair programming remotely since the start, and then when they learned about mob programming, they started doing mob programming. I've joined them a few times. One last picture I want to show is not programming at all. This is a space shuttle mission, but this is a good parallel to mob programming. All the brilliant minds, all the knowledge they need in the same room at the same time, because that amount of support is needed for a successful mission. Same basic idea. So we'll go on. I always ask this, why would we work this way? Maybe I can hear a few ideas from you. Just shout it out. Why would we work this way? What's the potential benefits? Saves time. What's that? No review needed, because we're reviewing constantly. What else? What's that? Knowledge sharing and building. Building friendship. You know, one thing I learned, that if you study with people, you become friends. Now, that's not always true, but we also found it with this. You're going to become friends with these people. What else? A few more. What's that? Quick. Quality, oh, we'll talk about that in a minute. Very good point. One more. There's 50 of you here, or 40. Somebody must have an idea. Are you too shy? Shout it out. I'm not hearing very well. I'm sorry. Can someone? Learning. Is that what you're saying? Yeah, so this is interesting. There were 4 things we noticed the very first day we did this. The first one was we got a lot done. The second one was it was really high quality. The third one was we learned a lot. And the fourth one was it was fun. Any one of those things is enough for me to say I want to do more of this. But this is what we normally hear. Knowledge sharing is the thing I hear the most. No need for code reviews or design reviews. We're continuously reviewing. We get many perspectives on the work, which allows us to get better done work. We're getting better ideas as we do it. We're getting really rapid feedback, and the rapid feedback allows us to focus on the right things. That means we can steer towards the more important things, the things that are more useful to us. We were getting higher quality. In the 3.5 years, I was at Hunter for 4 years. In the 3.5 years I worked there after we started working this way, we only had 3 bugs reported back from production code on about 40 projects we had worked on. 3 bugs. There was an 18-month period where we got no bug reports whatsoever. Now, that doesn't mean we only had 3 bugs. It just means we only heard back about 3 bugs. But the work that we had done after we started working this way was very high quality. But it was also better solutions. We solved the problems people were asking us to solve in better ways. We're not going to cover this today, but we were eliminating the queues and the excess inventory. This is important, but we'll do that, save that for another day. Any of you who are taking the workshop tomorrow will definitely get into that, at least I'm hoping to. This enhances the flow of the work. If you don't understand flow, this is the beginning of you understanding. Please get a book on flow, and there's a great one called The Principles of Product Development Flow by Donald Reinertsen. And it explains what flow is about in product development, which is what software development is. But flow means that the work that we're doing, we're focusing on things going from start to finish as directly as possible without any of the traditional wastes, which include the queuing and the inventory, but it also includes distractions, includes overwork, overproduction, transportation. There's other wastes that are involved. Lastly, it was more fun and less stressful. We found that to be very true for us. At the end of the day, we weren't worn out because we were helping each other throughout the day. There was no longer the need to stay intently focused on too many things. This is what happens when you work alone. If you're thinking about the code you want to write, that means you're thinking about the problem you're trying to solve. You're thinking about the solution you're going to try. You're thinking about the other people you need to talk to. Because maybe we're going to need to make a change to the database. Maybe we need to ask the product owner or whoever's in charge of the product some questions. And we're keeping track of all that stuff. We can keep track of all that stuff as a group much easier than as an individual. So we were finding it to be less stressful and more fun. But let's go on. I have one other way to address this for the managers in the room. Now, I've been a manager most of my life. My first business I started when I was 16 years old. I bought a pickup truck and a couple lawnmowers, used lawnmowers, and I would drive around the town with a couple kids I hired from school, and we'd mow lawns for people. So I've understood management from going way back to my childhood. Here's the point. Why would we work this way? Because that's what the team wanted to do. Managers need to understand this. The developers and other people on the software creating the software are pretty smart folks, and they can figure out how to manage these things. We'll cover that again in a little bit. The overall concept is this. We're going to focus on optimizing for the flow of the work rather than the output of the individual. Now, we weren't considering this on our way to becoming mob programmers. We were considering this, why is this working? This is something that came to us afterwards. Now, we already understood flow, at least I did, because I've been working with this stuff for years in other fields, in manufacturing and other things as well. When you pay attention to the output of the individual, you're not really doing anything useful. That just makes it easier to manage. It's easier for managers to think about. But there's no benefit to making things easy to manage. We need to make things easy for people to excel in their work. That's very different. Rather than trying to get the most out of each person, we're trying to figure out how to get the best from each person. It's a very different attitude. And most places I've worked in my life, they're looking for optimizing the individuals, not optimizing the team and making it possible for each person to be the best they can be. So I want to share a little story about how it started. Now, I'm not real sure how far we're going to go. I have enough to cover quite a bit more, but at any point you can tell me I'm done and I'll answer questions, okay? So this is about how this was able to get started in the first place. So I was already not a young guy when I started working this way. I had been working for the 10 years previous, from 1999 until 2009. I had worked in software development in various companies, and I found it not a very enjoyable thing. The places had a lot of pressure. They weren't very well managed, no matter how big or how small the company. And I started wanting it to be better than that. And so I had set myself up to start experimenting with different ways of working. And one of the things that I had been practicing or attempting is different ways for individuals to work with others, how to make collaboration easier. And I was becoming known for what you might consider the coding dojos in my local area, code quality, doing coding exercises to improve our skills, agile practices, and things like that, clean code, how to do refactoring. And as I was getting better known, I was given opportunities to help teams do this. Normally, I would work in a company for, let's say, 3 months to the longest time I was anywhere was 6.5 years. And my focus would be, how do we make it easier for us to do good work here? In 2009, I decided from now on, I'm only going to work in companies that are ready to do better. In other words, they're willing to put in the time to make things easier for everyone to excel at the work they're doing. So I was looking for work this way. I got a job that was actually exactly that, but it wasn't a big challenge. Once we improved things, I started looking for a bigger challenge. And so I started letting it be known, I'm looking for a bigger opportunity to share these things. So this picture I really love, and it gives me a chance to tell you all the pictures in my talk are done by my wife, Andrea. You can see her name if you can make it out way down at the bottom there. She's a children's book author and illustrator, and the only reason I travel around the world is to promote her books. So I come to these things just with a hidden agenda. I love this picture because I think of it like myself. Here's a little kid who loves rabbits so much, maybe wants to be a rabbit. So they dress up as a rabbit and they tell stories. This kid is telling stories about rabbits to some rabbits. And look at that. Some of the rabbits think it's fun, some are getting interested, and some are afraid for some reason. And that's exactly the way I see it here. I'm dressed up as a programmer, and I go around telling people stories, programmers about programming, and some people are interested, and some people are afraid. I've noticed this over and over. I hope they don't make me work this way. It's something I'll hear. Well, so I went to get this job. Actually, they invited me to come and interview. So I went to the interview because I was looking for a bigger opportunity. I had about 6 or 7 interviews before this one, and everywhere I went, I judged them not to be suitable for me. I'm not going to come to work here. No matter how much they want to pay me or what work they want me to do, I wanted to work at a place where they were ready to make the improvements that I felt we could make. So I did a little bit of an investigation of my own, and when they invited me to interview, I also went and I wanted to see the area where they were working and the people I would be managing and their peers and then my peers and my bosses. I wanted to know who these people were and how they thought about things. And the first thing I noticed was it looked like this picture to me. Like everyone was a zombie, that they were just trudging through their day. They weren't particularly interested in their work, and they certainly weren't working together. They had some big problems, and they had some projects that were really late. They had 2 projects that were 6 months to a year late, And I often will ask this question, what's the correct amount of time to be late? Anybody want to tell me? How late should you be? Now, I know this is France, but still. What's the appropriate amount of time to be late with your project, with your work? 0. Thank you. 0. When I see work that's late, it tells me several things. One is, maybe we're not good enough to do this work yet. Maybe we need to learn some stuff. Another is, maybe we took on the wrong kind of work. But the biggest thing that I see when work is late, particularly more than a few weeks, this isn't very important. If it was important, we would have done it. So that was a big smell for me. A smell means an indication of something that stinks, right? It's something that's not good. May be okay. But I noticed that. I also noticed they weren't collaborating. And that is a real obvious problem to me. If they're not collaborating often during the day, and the only time they collaborate is through emails, messages, or meetings, then we really need to improve that. I noticed the quality of their code wasn't very good. I know some other things we'll cover in a minute. As I talked to the managers who are making the decision to hire me or not, and my bosses who would have been the final decision makers, in talking with them, I noticed their language, the way they talked, was as if they were expecting someone to come in and solve the problems of this team so this team could do better. And I told them, it sounds to me like you're looking for a hero. And there is no hero. I told them there's a villain. Now I told them this pretty point blank. The reason this team isn't doing well is because they're being poorly managed. We can't blame the people doing the work for not doing well. There's only one place that the guilt lies, and that's with management. So what you need to do is stop managing them and let them manage themselves. They'll figure this out. That's one of my guidelines. I gave them 4 or 5 requirements. They cannot interfere. If they hire me, I will have a year to work with this team without interference. If at the end of the year you're happy with what I did, we'll just keep going. If you're not happy, I'll leave. You won't need to fire me. I know here in France, from what I hear, you can't get fired, right? Once you get the job, you'll die there. Is that right? Okay. So, but in the U.S., it's not exactly that way. But still, I told them, no interference. You can't tell me what to do. You can't tell this team what to do. Our job is to figure out how to work better. Another thing is, I have to have the right to cancel, postpone, or refuse work. So much work is taken on by developers that should never have been taken on. And the gatekeeper is going to be me. I'm going to be able to say, we won't do this work, we're going to stop this work, or whatever. These were my requirements. If they were to hire me, I did get hired. Okay, you would think I'm making quite serious demands here. It was just my demands for if I'm willing to come to work at a place. This tells me whether they're really ready to make the changes. We're not going to do estimates. I actually asked for a piece of paper from the CEO, the top person in the company, a letter with his signature saying this: I will not allow Woody Zuill or his team to do or provide estimates. We're not allowed to do estimates. Why did I want that paper? Because I knew every manager who would come to us for work is going to ask for an estimate. And I want to be able to hold up that paper and say, gee, I'd love to do an estimate for you, but look, we're forbidden from doing estimates. So what am I going to do? Well, I told him, you have to go to my boss and ask him for an estimate. He'll make up a number for you. Why should we waste our time pretending we know how long something will take? He can pretend how long he knows how long something will take. So that was the way we set it up. I told my boss, if you hire me, you're going to need to do all the estimates. And he knew estimates are a waste of time. They're actually harmful to our work, and yet everywhere I go, they do them. Why do we believe they work? They don't. But anyways, that doesn't matter. We're not going to do projects. Now, projects are where you have something that you know enough about, that you know how long it will take, how much material to buy, how many people to hire. You know those things, and we can't know that with software. But when you're done with the project is done. An example would be, I needed to get a new roof on my house a few years ago, and the roofing company could come in, tell us when they could start on it, when it would be done, how much it would cost. That's a project. With software, we don't finish the software and then quit working on it. Once the software is done, if it's useful to people, it's going to need to be worked on. It's going to need to be fixed. It's going to need to be improved. It's going to need to be enhanced with new things. If we stop working on it, the software will die. Living software, we work on until nobody uses it anymore, and that's usually because there's something better that's come along or we don't have that need anymore. Now, if we stop working on it, people will stop using it because we're not fixing the things and enhancing it the way we need to. So we're not going to do projects. So here's the way I was going to work with the team, and I explained this to the team. We're going to figure out how to collaborate. We're going to figure out how to work well together. I believe that the people doing the work are the ones who can manage that work, or the ones best to manage that work. So we're going to learn how to manage ourselves. That means we're going to be self-managed, self-organized, self-directed. All the things that managers usually do, the team's going to learn how to do for themselves. Their code was not very good, so we need to learn what bad code looks like and what to do about it. Part of that is just learning what does good code look like. An example of bad code is a method that has 300 lines of code in it. That's bad code with deeply nested if statements. Bad code is bad naming. There's lots of things that indicate the code's bad. It's really easy to learn those things. It's easy to see what bad code looks like once you start focusing on trying to learn that. So we're going to learn what bad code looks like, and we're going to learn what to do about it. And that's one of the things I was specializing in. And I also knew that if we learn this together, it helps build the team. So we're going to set aside specific time to deliberately practice learning what good code is like and how to write it. We're going to practice together for those two reasons. Once a week, 3 hours. My goal was to eventually make it maybe 20 hours a week we would spend studying together, improving our capabilities. I was only there for 4 years. We got it up to 8 hours a week. I think if I'd stayed there, we'd be at that 20 hours a week level now. It's more important that we increase our capability than it is that we do the work we're setting out to do. Most people don't agree with me on that, but I think there's enough science that indicates that's the truth, particularly in our industry. The team chose to use a coding dojo style, which originated here in Paris, to do this studying together. They had seen me doing coding dojos at user groups, and a couple of people on the team said, well, why don't we use that? That's a great way of learning. Somebody here had said that. It's a great way to learn. So we set aside the time to do that, and every Friday we would spend the time together in a coding dojo, practicing the new skills we're trying to learn for seeing what bad code is and how to fix it. We're also learning about things like read by refactoring, which wasn't a term then, but what read by refactoring is rather than reading code to understand it, you just start refactoring it. You don't need to know what the code does to refactor code. You can just start refactoring following some simple refactoring guidelines, like extracting out methods. If you have a 300-line block of code that's deeply nested, that needs to be refactored because there's at least 3 problems in there. Unnamed blocks of code, missing names. Deeply nested ifs means there's many paths through the code. Lots of problems. So we can start extracting out those methods. When we're done extracting out those methods, we'll have gotten a better idea of what do these things do, and we can give it good names. So this we were learning to do. Read by refactor, other refactoring mechanisms, and how to have clean code. We're also going to focus on good quality retrospectives. My experience with retrospectives is they're of some use, but they're usually done too late. So I started compressing the time, how frequently we do them. Instead of every 2 weeks, what if we do them once a week? Instead of once a week, what if we do them once a day? And I had gotten in that practice of once-a-day retrospectives. And the way we do it is, at the end of every day, we ask each other, what went well today? And the team stands in a little circle or something, and someone will say, oh, this went well. And then we'll ask, well, what was good about it? And if they can think of something, they'll tell what's good about it. And then we'll ask ourselves, how can we get more of this tomorrow? That's a stand-up, end of the day, turn up the good retrospective. So that's using this term, turn up the good, which to me means let's look for the good things and figure out how to get more of it instead of look for the problems, which are all around us, and try to solve the problems. I call this the problem with problems. We look at the problems and think we need to fix them, but very frequently our solution to today's problem just becomes tomorrow's problem. Our solutions don't solve what we thought they solved. They just introduced more problems. So the reverse of that is just look for something that's good and turn that up. Now, we still need to solve problems. We just need to get a better understanding of what that really means. And I think that that's for a whole nother time. Let's go on. One day, it was time for us to look at one of the projects that I had postponed. I was going to cancel it, but the team didn't know I had the right to cancel the work. I was helping them learn how do they make the decisions about what work should we be doing. And they came to me, one of the team members came to me and said, this project that we were late on, well, we're going to be really late on now. I know you postponed it, but it's due in December, and this was October. I said, well, what do you want to do about that? They said, well, I want to take a look at it. I'll bring one of the other programmers with me. We'll look at the code, and we'll come back to you with what our assessment is. So they went off. And this was good because I'm hoping they'll make their own decisions, and they were. And then they came back in about an hour. And they said, essentially, this is really bad code. So I hope you can see, to me, that made me feel very good. On the outside, I go, oh, that's sad to hear. But on the inside, I was jumping for joy because they now know what bad code looks like. They can tell that the code that was written a year earlier was bad code. It wasn't worth working on this code, by the way. It was terrible. And so then I asked them, well, what do you want to do about it? And they said, let's have a meeting so we can look at it and we'll decide what we should do as a team. Maybe who should be working on this. So we got together in a room. We reserved a room for 2 hours to look at the code and decide what are we going to do about this. But instead of just looking at the code, we started working on it. This was really important. Matter of fact, you'll see already, they're starting to make their own decisions. They now know what bad code looks like. They decided, let's have more people look at it. And now in that room together, they start working on it together. Instead of just looking at the code, immediately someone saw there's a method that has 300 lines. Now, we know we had learned that's not a good thing, and we learned what to do about it. So they followed our coding dojo mechanism of starting to navigate the person at the keyboard to cleaning up this code by refactoring. And in doing that, we started getting a better result. So after about 2 hours of everybody pitching in, now our coding dojo style was only one person could speak at a time, and we did that by a timer. But we removed the idea of the timer, and we removed the idea of only one person could speak automatically. We didn't make that a rule. We actually started saying, someone said, the first person said, well, let's refactor this, let's extract out a method here. And we usually talk about extracting out paragraphs, but it's like a little block of code that can be self-contained. As they extracted it out, the tool made some ByRef parameters. And ByRef is a code smell that we see that's not a good thing to do, and somebody pointed it out. So here we are helping each other navigate. After 2 hours, we got through quite a bit of that method, maybe all of it, and then somebody came into the room. We'd only reserved the room for 2 hours and said, hey, you have to leave because we've got this room reserved now. Now, we could have just gone back to our desks, but this tells me how sophisticated the team had become at turning up the good. As soon as we were asked to leave the room, one of the people who was sitting there on the team stood up and said, just like this, let's go find another room. Now, this is what I call intent. Behind each message that we make, there's an intent. If somebody says, let's go find another room, what are they really saying? What is the emotion they're expressing? You can tell me. Let's keep going. Give me more. Boy, I'll tell you, this is like a rule of life, right? And yet in the workplace, we're always, oh, this meeting's over, we got to be done. Let's get more of this. And so how are we going to do that? We looked up, we had about 50 meeting rooms in that company. We found an empty meeting room. If you find an empty meeting room at the last minute, it usually means the air conditioning is not working, the projector maybe isn't working, the chairs aren't comfortable, something. Well, we got one of those rooms. The projector wasn't working. I went and grabbed a projector. We came in and we just kept working. At the end of the day, we did our end of the day retrospective, and And we asked ourselves, well, what was good about today? And everybody, including me, said, boy, working together was surprisingly great. What was good about it? We got a lot done. It was high quality. We learned a lot, and we had a lot of fun. Any one of those is enough for me to say, I want more. And I asked the team, how are we going to get more? Well, you can tell me, what would we do to get more of this? Anybody? Do it again tomorrow. Let's do it again tomorrow. I went into the system. At that company, you cannot find a room for a whole day, a day ahead of time. You got to book that a month ahead of time. So I found several rooms we could go to, and we just set that up. Now, some people would say, oh, I got a meeting tomorrow, and that's okay. We'll be in these rooms at these times. Join us if you can. Within a week, we were all joining together. We had aligned our work schedules so that we could work together all day. At the end of just a week, we had seen this was so valuable to us. These little ideas are what's important to me. I think mob programming or software teaming is important, but I think these little ideas are way more important to me, the ones that I just shared. Let's get good at collaborating. Let's let the people doing the work make the decisions, learn how to manage that work. Let's figure out what our core skills need to be and have good, clean code rather than bad code. Let's study together. Let's have good retrospectives. These things coming together are what resulted in mob programming existing. This is about building an environment where great things can happen instead of figuring out what the great things we want are and trying to get those things. This is the oblique way of getting to a better future. So I like to say it this way. There's nothing magical about this. If we make it where we have an environment where the people can excel, they will excel. But it always seems magical to me. Everywhere I've been able to do these things, once we put things in place so we have a great environment, good things start happening. And I think we can end it with this slide, although I got a lot more we could cover. But this slide comes from an artist named, believe it or not, Robert Henry. Now, it looks like you would pronounce his name differently, but he was an American artist, and he was pronounced his name Henry. The object isn't to make art. It's to be in that wonderful state which makes art inevitable. That means let's not strive to do the great software that we want to do. Let's make an environment where this will just happen for us, where the great things will happen. Now, I don't know what we have time left to do. It's already 1:04. It's probably time for dinner now, right? I'm just making fun. Every place I've been in France, and I say, how long do we want for lunch? It's way longer than we would typically take in the U.S. Like in the U.S., you grab a sandwich while you're walking between meetings, right? And here, like, let's take a relaxed lunch. We'll go somewhere for 2 hours. So I know I cut your lunches short today. I apologize for that. So I'm not sure. I can continue on, talk about the main techniques we use, or we can answer questions. What would you folks like to do? Keep going? Okay. So this is this material I usually cover at the beginning of my workshop with some little interactive things that we would do along the way. But this is really, the next bit's about the technique we use, of the driver navigator mostly. This is not 5 people watching one person coding, because if we were doing that, it would be a big waste of time. We use the driver navigator, which comes from pair programming, so I'm showing this as a pair here. With the driver, that's the person at the keyboard, they're being guided by a navigator into what we want to do. This requires that everything be kept in the open, so we both have kind of an understanding of where we're going. This often devolves into something I would call driver observer. With driver observer, the navigator is no longer navigating or guiding the process. They're just watching the other person coding, and that becomes boring quickly. Try it and see. Do any of you pair program here? Do you do pair programming, show of hands? A few of you do. Excellent. So if we let it be just driver observer, it's really hard to keep focus, and it can be boring. With driver observer, we maybe have this unspoken rule that if I have the idea, I take the keyboard. Well, this is the opposite of driver-navigator. Driver-navigator, if I have the idea, I give the other person the keyboard. Now, I had worked this way as early as 2003 and maybe before, but I really had a focus on it in 2007, how powerful this can be. And to kind of put a cap on it, it became my only way of pair programming after it really became clear to me how important this was. I'd already been pair programming for 9 years or 10 years when I learned this is a good guideline to follow. My experiences with pair programming had been some good, some bad, but always better than working alone. I made a rule for myself starting, I think, in 2003, that if I'm writing production code, I will do it with a pair. I won't work alone. I also won't do it without test-driven development. Without those, I don't know how anybody works, but almost everybody does. I'm not sure why. So this same idea can work for a team with driver and navigators. With a bunch of people navigating, we have to have a few protocols because we can be speaking about different ideas and going in different directions. So the main overarching idea is that once we've started on something, we finish it. So if somebody says, well, let's try this, then we will finish the thing they asked to try before we try the next thing. Usually there'll be 2 or 3 ideas worth trying. So the first thing we might say is, what do we want to try? Somebody says, oh, I think this will work, and someone else says, oh, I think that will work. We're going to try both ideas. But let's try one first, see if it does work. Let's try the other, see if it does work. If they both work, a third thing often happens. We've already come up with an even better idea. So one of our guidelines was, we will try everybody's ideas. We will never say, that won't work. If up front we think we know something won't work, we're probably wrong. We are looking from too narrow of a viewpoint. My father, who was an engineer, he used to say, there's 1,000 right ways to do anything. We must never think ours is the one right way. There's many ways to do anything in engineering, or in our case, software. He was not a software engineer, he was an electronics engineer. So we used the technique that came from the coding dojos that started here in Paris. We have someone at the keyboard we call the driver. They are like the driver in a taxi cab. They're not telling us where we want to go. We're telling them where we want to go. You occasionally might get into a cab and just say, take me somewhere interesting. But that's pretty rare, right? You get into a cab because you know where you want to go. Let's take me to the international airport. We know where we want to go, so we tell the driver where we're going to go. And then they take us there. Now, often we need to do it at a more detailed level than that. But when you're in a big city like this and you need a cab, you know where you want to go. They've got their phone device that guides them to get there. In this case, everybody on the team is a navigator. They're going to guide the process. They're going to do it through discussion, through working at the whiteboard, through listening to each other, through trying each other's ideas, and supporting each other to finish out those ideas. And we would use a timer to do it, but I do not insist on a timer. It just happened to be the way we did it because that was based on how the coding dojo worked. The timer is there to keep us a little bit more lively, rotating through. So if we put somebody at the keyboard, then the rest of the team is guiding them. And we're just going to do it throughout the day. And the way that we would do it, when the timer goes off, we would change the person at the keyboard. We are not changing the navigators. The navigators will just be whoever's appropriate to guide at the moment. If I have an idea to try, I'll probably navigate it. If I have an idea to try, but I'm not sure how we would do it, others will help me navigate it. If I'm guiding it and someone else has a little input that'll make it easier, then they're going to help navigate, probably by helping me guide the person at the keyboard. And we just continue doing this throughout the day. So that's how you saw that in the movies. That's sort of how our day went. We think of the person at the keyboard as being a smart input operator. I like to think of them as being separate from the team. They're part of the computer. Just like your keyboard is not on your team, it's part of the computer. This allows the rest of the team to stay in the same cognitive space or in the same context and share the cognitive load. This is something I want the driver to help do. But if the driver contributes, they can really harm this. So we help them remain in flow, but if the person at the keyboard says something like, I don't think that's going to work, shouldn't we do this instead? They're not really doing the job of the keyboard. We've elevated our keyboard to being a verbal thing. We can talk with it. So this just makes it easier for us to get our ideas into the keyboard, and that means a tester who doesn't know how to code, or a product owner that doesn't know how to code, or a database expert that doesn't know how to code in this particular language, can guide the process without having to know the details of writing the code. So they can harm this process if the person at the keyboard. If your keyboard wouldn't let you type because they don't like what you're doing, you probably wouldn't use that keyboard anymore, right? If your keyboard didn't allow you to get your idea into the computer because you want to see how it will work, you wouldn't use that keyboard. And now a human has the place of the keyboard. But I have no strict rules. I really try not to have rules, and I encourage teams not to have rules. If I have one rule, and it is there are no rules. That was my only real rule. There are no rules. We need to be very, very flexible. The driver I like to think of as being part of the computer. They're a peripheral of the computer, conceptually. They're not going to be there for very long, 5 minutes, 10 minutes, then they leave the keyboard. On the other hand, I've worked with teams that will take a task, the same person will stay at the keyboard through that whole task. There are other ways to switch out too. Somebody might say, I don't want to type anymore. Someone else will say, I'd like to type for a while. You can decide different ways to change that person. But this allows the rest of the team to stay in the same context, in the same headspace. They're thinking about the problem and the solution. The person at the keyboard is focused on the code. Now that doesn't mean that you have to be able to code to take the keyboard, because there will be enough people to guide you, even if you don't know how to code, to get that code in the computer. We'd often do it where, particularly at first, the testers would want to take the keyboard. They're going to learn something about coding pretty quick. Within a week or two, you can't really tell them apart from the rest of the team as far as their coding abilities. You learn to code most of what we need to do pretty easily in this manner. But the navigator is going to stay in the same context and share the cognitive load. And this means we have a more calm, pressure-free, engaging day where we can stay focused for just long enough to get this bit done, take a break, come back to the next thing. We dialogue. That's how we think together. We use the work we're doing, what we're keying in, but also the whiteboard, and we're speaking with each other. So the whiteboard becomes part of the dialogue, and it's very important to me. Even when we're working remotely, we can use some kind of a whiteboard, an online whiteboard. They're not as good, but they at least work. So lastly, we're always sharing and integrating ideas. So if I share an idea and we try it, you share your idea and we try it, they might integrate nicely. In other words, my idea builds on your idea or vice versa, and then maybe we come up with a better idea, and we're doing that throughout the day. But we need to be able to do this in a relaxed and sustainable manner. That means each team player, each team member has to understand that they don't contribute all their ideas all the time. If you have a good idea to share, you might just write it down and wait till the appropriate time. And we're going to do it in the right way. That means we're going to do it respectfully. If we ever say something like your idea won't work, we're definitely going down the wrong path. And I've seen it over and over. When we think an idea won't work, we're going to be proven wrong in just a minute. So let's stop making those judgments early on. So I think we've now covered probably quite a bit. I think that it's a good time to go to questions. The next batch, I cover skills, and that's kind of a deep dive into these skills we're just talking about. If we gather together everything I shared with you right now, that's enough probably to get you started, because that was sort of the extent of my earlier talks, and people started doing this all over the world before I even traveled. And some of the videos that were made at conferences in the US were being broadcast around the world to, through YouTube or whatever. And people started doing this with no more information than what I just shared. Let's learn to collaborate well. Let's make up the rules we need. Let's be nice to each other, and we're going to do better. So maybe this is a good time for a question, if you have any questions. Yes? I think he's going to bring a mic to you. Thank you.
Hello. Yes, thank you. I was wondering myself, how do you manage turnover within the team? Because it seems that you're building a real team spirit, and it seems that they need experience working with each other, maybe to be efficient at the process.
Yeah,
and
so
the stability of the team seems important as well. So,
are you asking how do we build the skills we need to be able to work this way?
how do you manage newcomers coming to the team, or
a newcomer,
people leaving the team, or something?
So if a newcomer comes to the team, they almost immediately will be able to start providing value. In our environment, if we were going to hire a new person, we would have them come in and work with the team for a day so they could see how the team works. And if they think, yeah, I think I'd like to work this way, then they'd have a chance of being hired. So what we noticed first off was, if that person that's joining the team is already skilled at the thing we're hiring them for, they'll fit in right away. Because we pretty much naturally get along well in a team environment. If you were going to go play basketball with some friends of yours, and somebody new came up to the game, and they knew how to play basketball, they probably could join in. It's sort of the same thing. Now they might need some practice to how are we going to work well as a team, but there's already a lot of standards of how we work as a team. When I was really young, in my teenage years and into my 20s, I played music in a band, and somebody could call me up and say, hey, our guitar player or our banjo player can't make it tonight for this gig we have. Can you come and join us? And I didn't need to know their repertoire, because music is music. I already knew kind of their genre, so I could go and fill in. It's the same thing. So if you already have the skills, then you can onboard pretty quickly. I have some great stories about that maybe we can talk about later. But if you're brand new and you don't have any skills yet, let's say you're right out of college and you've never really programmed on any real work, this is a great way to onboard those people. We just put them right into the rotation. We turn to them for their ideas, because this is sort of important for anyone who's been working in software for 4 or 5 years. Your ideas are already stale. The way you understand things is already getting old after 5 years. This is an industry that changes rapidly. We want fresh ideas. So we're going to include that person in helping them to share their ideas with us. They will learn the skills of working this way within an hour. It just happens. But some people are pushier than others. Some people are quieter than others. A skilled team is good at helping the pushier person relax a little more, helping the quiet person express a little bit more. We'll find ways to do that. If I was coming to a company to help some teams that were lacking in these skills, there's lots of exercises we can do. Learning to listen, learning to be willing to try each other's ideas, learning how to guide each other, because when I learned to pair program, it took me several years to learn how to share my ideas, because you're used to just keeping them inside and just trying them. And how do we share them? And that's why I really like the whiteboard and so on. So there's ways to do it. I love to onboard people this way. As a matter of fact, if you ask people nowadays, you know, how difficult is it to onboard new people, many people will say this is their favorite way to do that. So hopefully that answered your question. Thank you. Any other questions?
Anyone questions? Yeah.
There we go. Thank you for the questions. I appreciate that.
Hi, thank you very much. I was wondering, how do you deal with those ones who are the scared rabbits and don't really want to play the game?
Thanks for picking up on the scared rabbits. That's nice. I would never force anyone to work this way, to start with. This should be voluntary. Most organizations where I've been there for more than just a training or a talk like this, if I can be in a company for a couple weeks or hopefully 6 weeks, then the ones who are reluctant at first start seeing the others and the progress they're making, and they start becoming more interested instead of just anxious. There are some people who can't work with others, and I would never force them to do it. That will hurt the team, and that will hurt that individual. Maybe they need to work alone. So it's always encouragement. I know of one person up in Stockholm was one of the very first to adopt working this way. And he showed me a way that he did. I went and visited a company he was helping, and he set up a team area, and right next to it, he set up a second team area. He would work in the first team area. People will walk by and see what they're doing, become interested, show them what they're doing. They go off. Maybe they spend a few hours there. But after a while, people come up and say, we notice you have this empty area over here. Can we borrow that for a while? Sure. And they're starting their own group. So just let people become interested, and maybe they'll be more willing to try it. But I would never force anyone. I would never have a talk with someone, you need to learn to work this way. If they came to me for personal advice and they're not collaborating well, there's plenty I could share with them about how to collaborate better, and maybe they will eventually want to work this way. I will say this, I think it's harder to learn to pair program than it is to mob or software teaming. It's like if you go out on a date, if someone asks you out on a date or you ask someone out, there's a lot of pressure, right? Are they going to say yes? And once they do, you're going to be on your best behaviors, maybe. But when you're with a group of folks, you're not so worried about it. You're not trying to impress anyone. You're not trying to, it's easier in a group setting. If like 6 of your coworkers say, well, let's go get some lunch, that's a lot easier than one person coming up and saying, hey, let's go get lunch that you've never had lunch with before. So I think it's easier to get started with a group than it is to get started with pair programming. So there's some ideas. Hopefully some of that's useful.
Some other questions? Yeah? Sorry, we'll go in front.
I can stay here till about midnight, so I can answer all your questions.
Do you have any story where mob programming didn't succeed?
Oh, yeah. So first of all, the places I've seen it not succeed is when, in two ways. One is when there's people who don't want to do this and they're being forced to do it. So they're going to do whatever they can to make it not work. Another one is where I've seen a team doing very well, and then the manager above this team gets moved to another department. And then the new manager sees this and says, we're not going to allow this to happen. So there are some, what I was thinking we would call anti-patterns. If one person is trying to guide the team through everything, then that's not really sharing the work. That will become boring quickly. Another thing is if the person at the keyboard thinks their ideas are the ones we should be using, that will hamper the thing. The main failure I've seen is when a management changes and they say, we're not going to work this way anymore. Because this is a naturally direct and easy way to work. I think it's highly effective. I'd be hard-pressed to find a place where it wasn't at least as effective as separating the people. When we separate the people, there are some barriers to the work that instantly are put in place. They can no longer talk directly to each other whenever needed. They need to go up, find that other person, remove them out of their current context so that we can bring them into our context. So that's an interruption to their thoughts, to their workflow. And then we need to explain to them what we're doing and why we need them. And then when they leave, the very first thing that will happen is we'll go, oh, I forgot to mention this. So like our process of communication is broken as soon as we separate people. There's a question that is always asked every time I give this talk. How can you possibly be effective with 5 people at one computer? And my reverse question would be, how can you possibly be effective if you separate the people that should be working together? If I was a new football coach, and we have a European-style football, if I was a new football coach and I came down and I saw all the players are on the same field at the same time, we could win 10 games or 11. How many people on a football? 11 people, right? We could win 11 games if we put each person in a different game. No, we're going to lose 11 games. We have to play together as a team. But in software, there's no rules of how big your team needs to be. There's no rules about which positions they need to be. Matter of fact, if you say, we never want to lose a game, so let's just put our whole team as goalies. Now, I know you're not allowed to do that. We would never lose a game if everyone was a goalie, right? Because nobody could get the ball into the goal. But we also couldn't win a game. That would be a silly game. If everybody on this team was a goalie and everyone on that team was a goalie, nobody would ever pay to see that game, right? Because that would just be a bunch of guys standing around. You could go out on the street and see that anytime. So you get the picture here, yeah. There's a lot to this. The failures that happen are often because it's hard to conceptualize the idea that teamwork is important. If an idea is hard to conceptualize, it's probably because we're not open-minded. Albert Einstein is quoted as having said, if at first an idea doesn't seem absurd, it's probably not a good idea. I think that's pretty cool. When I first heard about pair programming, I was 45 years old. So that means I was old enough to realize that if I had said, that can't work, 2 people at 1 computer, I would soon be proven to be wrong. So at that point in my life, I already knew, never say that won't work, because you're going to be proven wrong. And I think the same thing goes here. I'll cap this with one last thing. People will say, where's the research that proves teamwork is better than solo programming? As if I'm a researcher or something. We just did something and we're sharing it. But I would ask this question in reverse. Where's the research that proves separating people and making them work alone is effective? Because it would be the exact same research, but every manager separates the people with no research, nothing to prove that that's the right way to work, but they do it anyways. That's status quo. That's doing things a certain way because that's the way we do things. That's circular thinking. I hope I didn't offend any manager. Well, no, I always offend managers. So if you're a manager, sorry for offending you. If you are a manager and you didn't get offended, please come up afterwards. I'll find some way to offend you. Okay. There were more questions, and I'm willing to continue on.
Yes.
I'll let the mic person do that. Go ahead.
Thanks. Sometimes we got stuck because we can't find the people to provide advice.
Yes.
Or waiting for a release of a part of the code. Did you find any issue like that, and how did you overcome them?
Yeah, so that's a fundamental problem, right? That's a fundamental problem. If we are queuing, and that I would call queuing or waiting, and we cannot find a way to get rid of it, we are accepting it, that queuing is okay. And most of the time, the queuing or waiting of the work we do is the primary cause of waste. If we don't deal with it, we are automatically accepting it that we're okay with the waste. In large organizations, according to research that I've read, it's the major cause of waste. So I don't have an easy way to deal with it, but the way we dealt with it was, as soon as we noticed, we would do a value stream map. I can show you how to do that. I'm drawing it like this. A value stream map has 2 lines in it. One line is we're working, everything's going well. The next line below is we're waiting. Then we get the answer or whatever is completed, we can continue to get. So whenever we're waiting, it's on the bottom. Whenever we're working effectively, that we're delivering value, it's on the top. We want to see it so we know that it's happening and then figure out how to compress it. How do most of you deal with that? That you're working on something, you can't work further on it because you're being blocked? What do you do in the meantime while you're waiting to get unblocked? What do? Do you just sit there? Work on something else. To solve the problem of waiting, we've introduced inventory. The biggest waste is waiting. The second biggest waste happens to be inventory. That we introduce inventory. Inventory is anything we've worked on that isn't yet delivering value to the customer. Most companies have endless inventory. We've introduced a waste to deal with a waste, and that will never work. We're hiding the real problem. We're waiting. We're not getting answers. So I don't have an easy answer. With our team, we simply exposed how much waiting we were doing, and then we started dealing with it. The biggest waste was product owners, that when we would send them an email, they would say, oh, great, yeah, we'll have a meeting on Tuesday about that. Well, we can't work on this till we get the answer. Well, then we'll get it on Tuesday. Work on something else. That's the natural thing. So product owners was the biggest one. Testers was the next biggest one. The database people, and then the people who do our deployments. We want to absorb all that into the team. That's why in the ideal team picture I showed you earlier, it showed we had all those roles on the team, and that's how we got rid of them. As soon as we have a team that can do its work from start to finish, we've solved the problem of flow, or we've introduced flow, and we removed that queuing and other wastes of inventory. So that's not much of an answer, but that it's being exposed, that's critical. We need to see the problem to be able to deal with it. And there's a question up here, right?
Yes. In this company, people comes here just one day? Or
one day a week?
Yeah.
Or one day a year?
It depends. But,
okay, one day now and then.
Yeah, one day a week. So do you have advice to introduce mob programming in this company?
Well, do they only work one day a week?
No, 5 days. But
so you can work remotely. You can do this remotely.
And is it effective?
I think it's massively effective.
Okay.
I don't think it's any less effective remotely than it is co-located in the same building. What I would do, I would start practicing it. And you can practice mob programming as a team. And if you're going to work with those same people remotely, so you can do it on the day you are here together. If you're never here together, then it's always remote because somebody's going to be remote, right? If you're the one that's here this week, this day of the week, and someone else is here another day, then you would never be all together. But if you're all together, you can start practicing it all together. But when you're remote, there's no reason that you can't continue. I would practice it for a while, and I would practice it on a simple exercise. Learn the techniques of handing off who's the driver, guiding each other, keeping our mouths shut, the different things we need to practice. Since 2000, I started doing a lot of remote mob programming, and it works very effectively. I've worked with some teams. During the last 3 years, I've been working with a lot of teams where we work 6 weeks together. So I'm teaching them a bunch of stuff over a 6-week period. And the first thing we learn is how to work doing this. So that because we're working remotely, how can we better stay in touch with each other? And then we start learning, should we always sit all together? Should there be times when we split up? Mob programming doesn't replace solo or pair programming. It just adds another element. So maybe you would make a thing where every hour in the first hour in the morning we'll be together, and then we'll split up as needed, or something like that. You'll find a way to move towards it. There's many ways to do this. It definitely can be done remotely. Yes.
Yes. So I have another question about that. So you mentioned pair programming and mob programming, like with this navigator having IDs on things like this. Did you see any outside requirement, which this is really words, more advice about seniority? Like, does it work with a lot of junior people? Because in the company we may have some teams where there may not no one called really senior programming. So does it work, or if it doesn't, or what's advice to help those more junior teams to speed up or to get used to these practices?
That's a really excellent thing to consider. So I have one story that was the beginning of me seeing how effective this can be. I worked for a large financial firm that has 6,000 software developers. That's more people than a lot of companies have. And that was just their software developers. They would bring on hundreds and hundreds of interns. And then they would work on various teams. They'd distribute them amongst the teams. They had 8 people. 8 interns. These are people from college that are learning, probably they're doing some kind of software degrees, probably programmers. 8 people that they didn't have a place to put them. So they got a project and a product owner who had, their project had not been approved. So it didn't have a team yet. Said, well, let's just give you these interns. Those interns figured out how to get all this working. So if we're hiring people that are all beginners, but they're not kind of smart, we're probably not doing a very good job of hiring anyways. I will say this, I don't usually have the freedom to just hire whoever I want. And I'm pretty, every now and then I've worked at a place where I could slowly build a team. So usually we just get whoever comes. We don't know, are they going to work well together? Do they have the brain power we need? Do they have all the skills we need? The thing is, if we don't have the skills we need, we can learn them. It's that simple. That's the human condition. I'm pretty sure I had an ancestor way back in the early days who saw that when they were trying to get a prey, something to eat, that a pointy stick wasn't as good as a pointy stick that also had a spearhead on it made out of stone. Somewhere, some person, one of our ancestors that we probably have in common, figured out tying a little sharp stone on the end of the stick made it better. That's the human condition. We will always make things better. We don't even use pointy sticks anymore, right? Because we found other ways to get our food. You get the picture. Like, if it's all beginners and one leader, one tech expert, their job is to make everyone else a tech expert. Not of doing all the work and guiding all the work, but helping everyone else become leaders and technically capable, trying every one of their ideas, helping them learn together. Yeah, I think this would be ideal in that situation. Now, if we have all brilliant programmers, it works there too. Yeah. And what I showed you was ideal, and there's many other. We don't always get the ideal. It's rare that we get the ideal. Was that helpful, I hope?
So, in your situation with the 8 interns, did you bring like one tech expert to teach them? Or?
I wasn't involved in that. Okay, I had been giving training, and then they sent me this story.
Oh, okay.
And all they did was, those were 8 people who might need to go off the team to get information, like what database should we use, or stuff like that. But they figured it all out. They were able to do everything they needed to get their work done. So they were able to find the people that could help them. That was one of the things we found for ourselves. If we can't answer our own questions, there's 2 options. Find someone who can answer it, or learn for ourselves the answer. And usually the things that we can't answer for ourselves, that someone else needs to answer. In other words, we can't just look it up because it's more business related or something. We need to start figuring out, do we need a person with that knowledge on our team? In their particular case, they had what you might think of as a product owner who had the business knowledge. They just need to figure out, well, what language are we going to do it in? Where do we deploy it and stuff like that, which they won't know because they're interns here. They haven't been shown those things. They may need to get help for that or training for that. Yeah, but we'll always figure that out. Every startup is just that, No matter how smart the people are, they're going to have to figure everything out. Yeah. Any other questions? You're probably ready to go use the restroom by now, right? Yeah.
Any other questions for Woody, or are you fine? Yeah.
And I'm happy to keep answering. If you feel you need to go, it won't hurt my feelings, okay? Or it will hurt my feelings, but I'll hide it, and you won't see how badly I feel inside. Okay, please.
Imagine you have convinced me, and I want to do mob programming with my team. So I just go up and start, or do you have any advice to start in the best conditions?
So if you don't have permission to do this, that's something you might want to think about. But I don't let having to get permission stop me anymore. There was a time where we would just do what I call fly under the radar. It's like do things just enough so they don't notice, right? But I think the very first thing to do is to find a few willing people who would like to try a new idea. I know of, in the earliest years, a woman, Nancy Van Schwindewert, she saw a film of us doing this, then talked with me about it at a place, and then she took it to a company she was going to go consult with. And she just said something almost exactly like this. Look at this little video. She showed the little 3-minute video. Look at this little video. This seems crazy. Do you want to try it? It was kind of like, who's interested? But if you have a team of programmers, there's going to usually almost always be someone else who's interested. And that's been my job for a long time, is find those who are interested. And then find an easy thing to do. So I would say find either an exercise to do, if you're allowed to do that. At some places I worked, we would just do this at lunchtime. I'd make sure we buy sandwiches and desserts for everyone, and that gets them to hang out, and then we do it at lunchtime. But then also, if you aren't allowed to do it without doing any real work, find some easy work, like an easy-to-do bug fix. It's just there to help us learn how to interact. So any of the techniques we've used work, but there are many people who've also done this. In Paris, there's dozens of people who could help guide the process. There's probably plenty of people within this organization. find some people to collaborate with to help bring it forward. Any other questions? All righty, folks. Thank you so much. I had a great time, and it's been my pleasure.
Bravo, Woody.
Thank you.